All right, everyone, we are back reading Counting the Cost, Chapter 5. So, Jill is not wanting to go to a promotional activity in Houston because she's made a commitment with her ministry in Central America, and Jim Bob puts a lot of pressure on her, and she's navigating like the difficulties and the dangers of living in Central America, and it is a whole mess, and it really gives you a crazy insight into Jim Bob's control. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Chapter 5. Tearing apart. Do you still want to go? In the immediate aftermath of the release, Derek and I had not talked much about going to El Salvador, but it was getting close now. Decisions had to be made. It had been less than 2 weeks since Jess and I had sat down with Megan Kelly. On that day, we had taken our seats beneath the bright lights at the big house and did what we could to stand up for our parents, answering all of Megan's questions, with Josh watching from a couch just out of shot. Okay, so I recently rewatched both parts of the interview, the Jim Bob and Michelle part, and the Jill and Jessa part. And I believe he must have been sitting on a couch, like kind of over here, because in a lot of the shots you can see the like set of couches that were right behind Megan, like in the center of that big room they have in there. The interview with Jill and Jessa and Jim and Michelle, it's really set up where they're at like the kitchen aisle, basically. So he must have been sitting right off the corner. That, to me, why did he need to be there? I get we're here because of him, but it's just inappropriate. But it's just so gross now knowing that Josh was there, like, watching them. And probably they knew he was, like, analyzing and, like, judging every single thing they said. It's just really gross. I am really glad Jill told us, though, because that gives us a lot of perspective on just how bad that interview was. And just how bad the fact that they wanted them to do that interview was. Answering all Megan's questions with Josh watching from a couch just out of shot was like having a bandage ripped off a deep and open wound. It was agony, so painful that I didn't really pause to ask why Josh was allowed to be there in the first place. What was worse was the fact that I'd hoped it would calm things down. It didn't. The paparazzi were still chasing us. The internet was still feasting on us, pouring over every statement from the network, every new photo, every new angle. My nightmares were getting worse, and there was nothing I could do to block any of it out. All I was doing was surviving from one breath to the next. So yeah, I wanted to go. I felt like it was something we were called to do, but I knew there were risks. Being missionaries with this particular organization, we would be responsible for raising our own financial support. The show had given us a level of exposure that was way above anything we could have created for ourselves, but it had brought with it some complexities. We weren't naive to the fact that we might be seen as some kind of target, so we chose not to reveal where we were going and only ever talked about working in Central America. The last thing we wanted was for someone to be able to track us down. Okay, so when she talks about in the middle of that paragraph, we would be responsible for raising our own financial support, I wanted to talk about that for a minute because at the time, they were reaching out like on their platform to get donations. And I know a lot of people at the time were like, girl, like you're on TLC's biggest show. Why are you asking for donations for your ministry? Like you should be able to fund it at least a little bit. Like why are you asking us? And I know they got big reputations at the time for being grifters. But really what we didn't realize was they were not being paid at all for any of this. So looking back now, it gives you a lot of clarity towards what was really happening behind the scenes. The first thing that happened, someone tracked us down. At least that's what Derek and I were convinced had happened when we arrived in El Salvador, and we were told by Mike that he had just received a call from a Salvadorian journalist who wanted to come and write a piece about the mission. Something about it didn't add up. The mission was small, and apart from Derek and I starting that month, there was nothing else new that had happened. Certainly nothing that would cause a journalist to suddenly take interest and want to visit. Mike didn't share our suspicions. He told us that he knew the journalist in question and had been interviewed by him in the past. All the same, I was glad when the baby and other demands kept me away from that area of the mission, out of the camera's eye on the day the journalist visited. What do y'all think? Do you think it was like somebody trying to get Duggar info, or do you think it was just everyday type of stuff? A few days later, when the Sun posted a grainy picture online of Derek at the mission, alongside a story of how we'd fled Arkansas and how they had tracked us down in El Salvador, Mike apologized. I don't think that was necessarily related to the local journalist, though, from what it seems. I also never heard that story or saw that photo, so I don't know about that. It was kind of him, but it was too late by then. Damn, rude. The piece hadn't just named the country we were in, it even named the mission itself. The target on our back had just gotten a whole lot bigger and brighter. To make matters worse, we soon discovered that there had been a recent increase in gang violence in the area. There were rumors of killings and kidnappings and whispers that the wealthy were a particular target. I mean, I feel bad that their location was leaked. However, you are on one of the largest shows in reality TV at the time and you decided to do this dangerous mission. So at the same time, it's like, yeah, like people are probably going to be able to find out just by word of mouth even who you are, just because you're a recognizable face at the time, not necessarily anymore, but at the time, and you might be targeted. So I don't know, like I feel bad, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know what you really expected. Despite the ever-present fear of what might happen if we got caught up in the gang violence, life in El Salvador had its good parts. We stayed on the mission's property while a mission multi-purpose house was being built overlooking a valley that was densely packed with banana trees and a whole bunch of other jungle plants I didn't recognize. That's fun. I divided my days between caring for Israel and running groups with local women and girls. We had no AC, no Wi-Fi, intermittent electricity, and an army of fire ants that were desperate to take over the kitchen. It took some adjusting to, but growing up in a large family, I had learned to be patient and not always have everything I wanted. Thanks to the show, we'd lived well for years, but I didn't miss the luxuries. It felt good to figure out how to do laundry without all the usual appliances and how to clean food while being careful about the contaminated water. Arkansas and being part of a filming family felt just a little further away, and I was grateful for a little more space. The show still had a hold on us, and a lot of time was taken up with emails, conversations, and a lot of filming on our own. But the location and the rhythm of life made it easier to cope with the filming requirements that had remained with us, for which we had to make the occasional trip back home. Whenever we could, we savored the moments of calm that this simple life brought us. That probably was, like, even though it was dangerous, it probably was like a good respite from all the stresses of family and doing the filming that you really didn't want to do anyway. I was grateful too for the opportunity to see Derek in mission mode once again. He thrived on the work, and I was sure that I'd never seen him so peaceful or so content as when I was sitting on the back balcony looking out over the valley with his Bible open on his laptop and his notebook ready beside of him. Derek didn't look so peaceful or content the day he connected to Wi-Fi and logged into Twitter. "Hey babe, I just read something about Josh," he said. "People are saying he's been caught logging into some website called Ashley Madison for people who want to have an extramarital affair. I Googled it and there are a bunch of tabloids running the story." What's crazy is that all of this has happened, like Josh coming out, Megyn Kelly, and then them moving to El Salvador, and then this Ashley Madison thing. I believe the original In Touch records were released in May, and I believe, I could be wrong, don't quote me on this, I believe by August, the Ashley Madison stuff had to come out. It might have been a little bit longer. I don't know if my memory serves me correct, but it could have been more than 5 months. I think it was like 3 months. That is so much like hustle bustle change for one couple. That is wild. I felt my heart plunge in my chest, but I decided to play it differently this time, to be active instead of passively waiting for the story to emerge. I wanted to know the truth, so instead of ignoring it or waiting for my parents to tell me what was going on or trying to get information through the grapevine from siblings, Derek and I decided it would be best if I texted Josh right away. I wanted to hear directly from him to know whether there was any truth in the rumors. I mean, girl, knowing Josh, there was truth in the rumors. You don't really got to ask. But I definitely probably would do the same thing, honestly. Like, I would be like, yeah, this is probably true. But I'm going to go directly to the source because I'm tired of this, like, back and forth with my dad having this total, trying to do, like, PR within the family. Like, that would piss me off. I would definitely just call Josh up directly. I got no reply. Oh. A day or two later, Mom called. It's been devastating for Anna and the kids, she said, and I could hear the same weary, frustrated tone she had used in the Oklahoma cabin just a couple of months earlier. She told me that the rumors were true, that Josh had confessed that he'd been addicted to pornography for years, and that he had paid to join a social networking site for people wanting to cheat on their spouses. By the time the call ended, I felt just as weary and just as mad at Josh and the whole situation as Mom. This time it was up to me to share the news with Derek. What happens now, he asked. He is being sent away, I sighed again. It's like, you're a grown-ass man. Pull up your bootstraps. You don't need to be sent fucking away. Just like get your life together. We had agreed to work with Mike's mission in El Salvador for 2 years, but had some prior commitments, mainly involving the midwifery training back in the US that meant we had to return home briefly. So not too long after Josh's affair news broke, we flew back to Arkansas and made our way back to Tawnytown. Oh, by the way, I don't have a video really on the Ashley Madison scandal, but allegedly his OkCupid, I think it was OkCupid. Allegedly his OkCupid account leaked, and I do have a video on that from maybe a month ago, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Anyway, let me continue. It was fall, a season filled with so many great memories of home. Trips to Silver Dollar City, our favorite theme park, and long games of Bible charades at home, where one older sibling would lead 3 or more little ones in recreating anything from David and Goliath to the stoning of Stephen. We had so much fun back then, but when we returned from El Salvador, the big house felt differently to me. There was no Scott, no TV cameras, no visitors sitting with Pops in his office. The big house had lost its usual buzz of excitement. It felt somber. Mom looked tired. A lot of my siblings looked stressed. But that evening when we joined the greater Duggar family for Bible time in the living room, Pops had some news to share. Hey guys, he said after we'd greeted each other, hugged, and everyone made a fuss over Israel. I just talked to Josh and the guy who runs the place where he is staying. He seems to be doing good. He's been working in the kitchen, and the guy who runs the program says he's doing really well. He said he's been like a role model for some of the others, that he's their best person there. I feel like he claimed that in, I think it was in one of his maybe letters to the judge, letters of recommendation and character, where they're like, yeah, he's in jail ministering to people. That's always their narrative whenever he gets sent away or sent to an institution. Mom had told me about the program, a Christian-run rehab center up in Rockford, Illinois. I knew nothing about rehab, but it sounded better than sending him away to work construction. Okay, shade. We had some trouble getting him up there, said Pops. The paparazzi were trying real hard to find out where he was going. They even tracked the tail number of his flights. Okay, why does it matter? Just let them take pictures of him. Who the fuck cares? But at least we got him in there without being seen. The guy who runs the program said they had some photographers show up at the open chapel looking for Josh, but the staff there have been very kind to us, and they were able to find a way to keep him out of sight. I just wanted to share the update with everyone, as we were happy to receive a good report, and we pray that God continues to work on his life while he's in there. The conversation changed soon after that, but I was left with his words ringing in my head like a bell. Though I love my parents, and it made a lot of sense that they would want to protect and care for their child, I couldn't help but think about the lengths that Pop had gone to in order to guard Josh's privacy and keep him from being publicly humiliated. I mentioned this to Derek, and he said that he had noticed the same thing. The feelings grew stronger within me, and by the time I went to bed, I felt sick to my core. When the In Touch story broke, all I had wanted was to be protected. All I had wanted was to have privacy and space to grieve without feeling the weight upon myself to fix the situation. I knew that in time we were all going to do what we could to fight for justice in the legal system that had failed us, initiating a lawsuit against the magazine and the people who were behind the illegal release of the records, which they ended up losing that case. And when I say they, I mean the Duggar family. I also knew my dad would fight hard too, and I was grateful for that support. But back when we'd sat in that cabin discussing the show, what I'd really want was for Pops to say, no, we're not going to put you on Fox News. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you girls out of this. We are not concerned about the future of our show anymore. I wanted my daddy to stand up for me in that way. Had he known that? Would he have done something different if I'd spoken up? I had no idea. I'd spent much of my life listening to IBLP teaching on the umbrella of protection. When I needed it the most, it failed me. It felt as though I, a woman, was expected to do all I could do to protect Pops and Josh. Nobody appeared to see it differently. And that truly is so sad, and something that comes up even in that Megyn Kelly interview, but it comes up all the time. he spends so much, allegedly, money on, rehab, on legal fees and whatnot to protect Josh and to get Josh the best. But he sends Jill out like she's a piece of shit, like won't even have her as part of the family, really. Like, not a true member of the family. Like, it's very different. Like, she's very, like, segregated and secluded from the rest. What is it that he wants to protect Josh, but he can't even do, like, the littlest things for the girls? Like, he just doesn't give a fuck. And you'd think it would be, like, he'd be more protective of the girls than the boys. Like, that just seems... I mean, even I would be probably... If I had daughters and sons, I would probably be a little bit more protective over my daughters. It just doesn't make any sense. Also, I wonder if he's going to be as protective of Joe as he was with Josh, now that Joe is in a similar situation. I'm just really not sure. It's also so sad to hear that she wanted her dad to protect her from the Megyn Kelly interview and having to fight for the show and for Josh and Jim Bob's reputations, but he couldn't even care about that. We were back in the US for a few weeks, and during our stay there, we spent plenty of time over at the big house. It was good to be with family, especially without the presence of TV crews for just a few weeks before things picked back up in full force. Though our show and all the reruns had been pulled from their regular airing time back when everything was released in May of 2015, filming hadn't taken much of a break for long. My mom, Jessa, and I had already shot one scene for the network in August in New York City, and there was talk of more show plans picking back up soon. In between studying for my upcoming exam, we were busy catching up on doctor visits as well as continuing to raise support and meet with people to update them on our ministry. For a while at least, it almost felt like a normal family. But normal families don't have family meetings where execs from a TV network roll up and pitch the idea of starting a new show. That's what happened one day in mid-September. Okay, so that's interesting, like with the timeline. So yeah, the Ashley Madison thing must have happened like August, and they're already like a month later, all this is happening, they get back to the US, and then new show pitch. Like, this is a lot happening in a 4-month span. That's what happened one day in mid-September when we were back home. Pops introduced the network guys, and I recognized the girl who spoke first. I'd seen her at various media appearances, and most recently the Megyn Kelly interview. She might even have been at my wedding. I wasn't sure. With a guest list of 2,000, it was impossible to keep track of who had and hadn't been there. We don't want to punish the victims, she said, looking around. So we've been trying to figure out how we can get the show back up and running. At the beginning, we're going to focus only on the older kids who are adults, but especially those who are married and have moved out of the house. Eventually, we might be able to come back around to showing the younger kids and your parents, but Josh will not be on the show. We cannot have him part of it at all. So it's like, we don't want to punish the victims, and obviously, I don't think TLC, at least everybody at TLC knew that they weren't really getting paid in a traditional sense. But it's like, we don't want to punish the victims, but we're also not going to pay them. Because I don't agree with, like, the fact that, like, just on the basis of Josh, having the teenage incidences, that the show should be canceled. Like, I don't think that's true. But at the same time, it's like, these girls are low-key. I don't think it's really good for them to have the show anyway. And it doesn't seem like most of them like it. Now, I mean, Joy said, like, I don't think we'd film anymore. Ginger's like, I love the crew, but I don't think I would want to have a show probably like that anymore. What have you. Like, they obviously, like, didn't really like it, or at least from my perspective. I could feel the whole room shifting its focus onto Josh's wife, Anna. She sat silent and still, like a rabbit, hoping a hunter would just move on. Before we continue, said the network representative, we want to make sure you guys are on board. Our producer, Scott, spoke up. We'll have to rebrand the show, give it a new name and a whole new filming style. No more cutting back to old footage like before. It's all fresh and all new. He paused and looked at us older kids. We can't bring the show back without you. What do you say? In spite of everything I'd just heard, it felt a little like the watered-down version rerun of the Oklahoma cabin conversation to me. I wanted to be helpful to Pops. I wanted to show him that I was on his side, but what about the cost? I wasn't sure that either Derek or I saw there being a whole lot of room for us on the show on the future. The mission field was where our hearts belonged. My siblings were taking it in turns to voice their support and agree to the new show. When it was time for Derek and me to speak, he said that life was complicated for us now that we're in El Salvador. It's dangerous down there, he added. If we draw too much attention to ourselves in the mission, it could cause problems. We wanted to help, but we made it clear that our involvement would look differently now. We would be gone again soon, and this time when we returned to Central America, per our commitment, we would not be back to the States at all for several months. If we were going to have us on the show, they'd have to be flexible and creative, especially if they were thinking on calling it Jill and Jessa, counting on. We wanted them to know for sure that Derek and I were firmly committed to pursuing our calling as missionaries. The rep listened, then talked about us having approval over all content. Derek and I exchanged glances, and I knew that, like me, he thought it could work. Girl, get that shit in writing then. When we had all agreed, the rep had one final point to raise. If we're going to do the show again, we just can't skip over what happened. Anna's going to have to sit down and talk about the affair, and the rest of you are going to have to talk about what happened with the magazine. Are you going to be okay with that? We all froze. I didn't think any of us were okay with it, but the play had already been set with the Megyn Kelly interview. Going on TV, opening our most painful wounds for the sake of ratings. It was what it looked like when you're a TV family. I felt for Anna. She'd been through so much already, and now it was going to get worse. I also, I have my own ever-changing, ever-going back and forth thoughts about Anna. But damn, Jim Bob, you're going to make her sit there and talk about her nasty-ass husband. That's so wrong. Even though we'd agreed to the trip to the U.S. before we took up our post in El Salvador, spending 6 weeks in the U.S. so soon after we'd begun our work on the mission wasn't ideal. When we returned to El Salvador in December, Mike asked that we commit to remaining there until the following July. No more trips back to the U.S. We gladly agreed. We wanted to be all in all the time. Things felt different when we returned. It wasn't just the 2,200 miles between us and Arkansas, or the fact that communication was so difficult. The new show marked a new beginning, and we had some fundamental changes to the way we interacted with those running it. Earlier in the year, around the time we were leaving for Central America, we had set up a 501c3 and asked Chad to help us with all of our fundraising. In the fall, when we headed back and filming had picked up again, we also decided to ask him to be our main point of contact for the network. Bad choice. Suddenly, it didn't feel like Pops was the one asking us about when we could film or what we could commit to, and we hoped it would help the show become more balanced and feel like less of a burden. With Chad on our side, we hoped that we might be able to avoid some of the emotion when it came to negotiating our involvement with the show. For a while at least, I felt optimistic. Maybe the commitment would be manageable and the show would give Derek and I just enough exposure to continue raising the funds we needed to remain on the mission field. I also can't really believe that Jim Bob was scheduling and telling them their commitments, because with 19 kids, communicating all of that, that sounds like more than a full-time job. How did he have time for this? There was one more reason things felt different. In the short time we had been away, the gang situation in El Salvador had gotten even worse. There were a lot more police on patrol in the capital, San Salvador, and in our little village, some of the shops and houses had started hiring armed guards. We'd had our own guard ever since we'd arrived, but it didn't feel like much protection anymore. I just can't imagine, moving to that sort of situation, it being a choice. I get that you want to help people, but I also don't know, the terms of their mission. What are they actually doing? Is it more of, an evangelizing thing, or is it more, on the grounds, you're showing God's love through helping people in, different ways? I don't know. But I just can't imagine with a little baby choosing to do that. Maybe that's selfish of me. One evening, while Derek was off somewhere, I was with a few of the ladies on the team inside our room in the church. It was quiet and remote where we lived, so we all heard the single gunshot that echoed across the valley. We froze. It was close. When the second shot rang out soon after, we panicked. Two of the older moms hurried me into a closet, and as I squatted on the floor, was with Israel pressed close to me, I listened to the sounds of feet scurrying around as others found places to hide. Minutes passed. It was hot in the closet. The air was stale and lifeless. I listened hard, but there was no sound coming from the other side of the closet doors. I had no idea whether that was a good sign or not. My heart was screaming in my chest. The sound of blood in my ears was almost deafening. I wanted to call out and see what was going on, but if it was a possible kidnapping, our survival depended on us going undetected. Israel started to squirm to let me know that he was too hot. He took a breath and made the noise that he always made before he started to cry. I fed him, desperately hoping that would work. After about 10 minutes, someone gave the all clear. one of the guards at the other end of the property, had been showing off and had let a friend fire his gun. At first I was relieved, then I was annoyed that the whole thing had been caused by someone acting so foolishly. As the sky grew dark, I was worried. That night, for once, my nightmares weren't set in a dark Arkansas bedroom. Most of the time, gunfire was a rarity, and life had started to find its rhythm. Each week brought in a rich array of opportunities to pray for people, for Derek to preach, for us to visit a local orphanage, and to generally spend quality time being a mom of a little one alongside other moms and their babies. My family had been visiting the mission down there for years, and I was glad that many of the people we were working among considered themselves our friends. In the strangest of ways, I felt at home down there. As Christmas approached, it was time for the annual mission trip to El Salvador. As usual, a handful of Duggars were coming, including Pops and several of my siblings, as well as a new friend of theirs, a great guy named Jeremy, who my sister Ginger was getting to know. 6 months had passed since we formed our Dillard Family Ministries, our 501c3. We'd post about it on our family blog, and so many people have been generous in response. That initial burst of financial support was amazing, but since moving, the fundraising had gotten a lot harder. Money was flowing out of our ministry bank account a lot faster than it was coming in. Like any other missionary family, we discovered quickly that fundraising when you're on the field is hard work. Things were a little more complicated for us because we were on TV, and we'd had a few comments from people on Twitter who assumed we were making lots of money off the show and shouldn't need to go asking people for help. Derek wanted to set them straight, explaining that we didn't make a dime off the show and that our involvement in it was purely voluntary, but per my request, he stayed quiet. Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was discussing a few minutes ago with the comment about how they were garnering financial support. It would also be hard for me to just let people say that stuff about me and not be able to set the record straight. Derek is a strong man for being able to be basically called a grifter and not be able to say anything just because your wife, doesn't want you to rock the boat with your weird ass father-in-law. I don't know if I have the strength for that. We figured that if we could do a good job of presenting what we're doing, and Chad could help us with providing updates and maybe putting on church events and meet and greets when we came back to the U.S., then that fundraising might just get a little easier. The mission house that Mike's ministry had been building was completed just in time for us to move in during the first week of December, just before the Christmas mission team arrived. Mike was excited to show us the place, and a couple days later, when Pops and some of my siblings arrived with the rest of the team, we showed them around too. The house was pretty empty, so Mike took Pops and a few other people to the city one day to shop for some household items. They came back with a washing machine, a rice cooker, and a few other things. For a mama with a little one in reusable diapers, that was a good day. A few nights into the trip, Pops, Derek, and I were sitting around our dimly lit bedroom as I nursed Israel to sleep. It was a typical night on the edge of the jungle, and all of us were feeling wiped out from 90-degree heat and 100% humidity. Our single fan was no match for the conditions. I don't remember who brought it up, but somehow we started talking about the show, the filming schedule, and our availability. Probably Jim Bob brought it up. Suddenly, without warning, the topic shifted onto a subject that I had always avoided discussing with my parents: money. With his background in accounting, Derek always paid special attention to our finances, and he was starting to get concerned when looking into the future that the initial fundraising was not sustainable. As we continued to talk about ministry fundraising efforts and keeping supporters in the loop via regular ministry emails and blog updates, we were also reminded on a different note about our personal finances. Even though our ministry finances were completely separate from our own personal finances, it spurred our thinking. Since the start of the new rebranded show, Jill and Jessica Counting On, we couldn't help but think again about when we might see some income for all of our previous and current involvement. After arriving back in El Salvador, Derek and I talked a few times about the fact that we had never seen any income for our work on the show. But I would always feel bad about going there, so I'd circle back to remind him about the show being a ministry, which is where the conversation always ended. Bro, Derek, again, is so strong that would piss me off so bad. But tonight, with Pops in the room, Derek wanted to talk. I'm just wondering, Pops, do you think we could maybe see some sort of income from the show at some point? Pops tensed. I cringed, bracing for impact. He looked genuinely shocked. When he regained his composure, his words were carefully measured. Derek, from the beginning, our family has viewed this as a ministry. an opportunity to share with the world that children are a blessing. Back when we started this show, we didn't make anything off of it. I was the one who was able to negotiate a good deal for our family. I could retire right now. The only reason I'm still doing this is for all of you kids. Pops sat back. Question dodged. Conversation over. I looked at Derek. I could tell he was thinking. It was like he was checking a column of calculations a second and third time before hitting return. Eventually, he spoke again. Well, how about us receiving a certain percentage of what comes in? Could that work? Pops paused. His jaw set tight. We used to pay Josh, but decided not to do that after a while because it wasn't a good idea. I wonder why that is. That is really interesting. I wonder why that wasn't a good idea. Then he shifted, smiling at both and changing course, seemingly looking for another way to shut things down. Michelle is the one that had all these kids. We wouldn't even have this show if it weren't for her. Girl, what does that have to do with anything? It was obvious that Pops wanted us to pick up on his cues and bow out of this dance, but Derek wasn't giving in. He was respectful, but his voice was firm and his demeanor unwavering. Yes, that's true, but we've also added a lot of value on this show and done a lot to contribute. After all, the show is called Joel and Jessa Counting On. It was a game of chess. I knew that there were other moves Derek could make, like mentioning the fact that our wedding alone had drawn 4.4 million viewers for hours of primetime television, or that as a couple we'd taken part in multiple People magazine cover shoots to promote both the wedding and Israel's birth episodes, which had been big successes themselves. Pops was quick to respond. I know y'all did some iPhone video or something for the pregnancy and birth stuff, and we appreciate all of that, but it takes teamwork. We all have to help out. Like, some of the kids are filming in a lot of areas of their lives, and at times some will be more involved than others, but it averages out in the long run. For a moment, I thought Pops was done with the conversation, but he surprised me. Turning to Derek, he asked, What are you worth? $10 an hour? 12? That's what I pay some of the others who work for me. It was the first I'd ever heard of Pops paying anyone in the family, but I could read the signs. It wasn't an invitation to debate or discuss, and it certainly wasn't a joke. It was a dismissal. He wanted us to back off, to go into full retreat, but Derek wasn't having any of it. Jim Bob is not used to someone who will actually talk back to him, obviously. Well, said Derek, remaining calm, what's the show worth? Huh? You can't appraise the value of a worker to a business until you know what the whole business is worth. So I guess before we can tell you what we're worth, we need to know what kind of deal you've got with TLC. Pops' mood soured further. He was already upset, and the effort to stay calm was starting to show. Derek, when we got into this all those years ago, we really just wanted to reach people to show that children are a blessing. It's not something we went looking for. God brought this opportunity to us, and we really feel like he has blessed it and helped us reach so many people, many who would otherwise never even step foot in a church. Nearly every day we're getting emails from people to say that they've been impacted. They've shared how they've given their lives to Jesus, or started going to church again, or decided to have more children just by seeing Christian values portrayed through the show. Think about how many people we've been able to reach on a secular television network. I'm not saying your work here isn't great, but we are reaching more people through the show than you are here on the mission field. The sting was sharp. Also, what the fuck does that have to do with them getting paid? Like, he's just throwing anything at the wall, trying to get him to stop. All the while Pops and Derek had been talking, I'd been cringing, trying to hide myself away right there on the bed, wishing that the conversation would stop. All my internal alarms about pushing back on authority had gone off full volume. But Pops' comments had bite. It hurt. It felt like it was designed to make us back off. But Derek didn't scare so easily. Derek does not give a fuck. I understand, Pops, but we would be grateful if you could pray about the possibility of paying us something. Jill has contributed a lot of hours to filming over the past decade, and she has nothing to show for it financially. I know she's the first daughter to get married, and that you're still figuring all this out, so we get it's awkward, but I'm sure as some of the kids get older and marry too, they'll be thinking about these things also. When Pops left our room, Derek and I talked a little longer, prayed, and then went to bed. Derek had no trouble sleeping, but I was wired too tight. I was anxious and panicking, and my heart was threatening to burst its way out of my chest. I wasn't used to seeing someone talk back and press Pops like that we would be seen as disrespectful, even though Derek had been polite throughout. In the culture I'd been raised in, questioning a parent's authority was a very negative thing, and I hated the thought of rocking the boat like that. Nobody had ever done it before, but I was sure if anyone did, the punishment would be severe, most likely resulting in an effective banishment from the family. That's crazy that she just thought that when she knew that it was that serious. He must have been putting down the iron fist, like before anyone ever even thought about like Derek coming up and blowing things up. But I was also with Derek on wanting more information about the finances of filming. So long into the night, I stared into the darkness, hoping and praying that we could work things out and get more information without causing any problems. Somewhere in the middle of those long human hours with the cicadas making their constant chorus outside, my thoughts turned to Derek. He wasn't plagued by guilt or bound by fear. It reminded me of what Jesus said in the Bible about children not being afraid to ask their father for bread. I felt something change inside me. I was mortified by the thought of Pops feeling angry with us. But I was proud of my husband too. He'd fought for his family, just like he'd promised to do on the day we got married. I mean, yeah, Derek's right. I mean, plain and simple, whether you like him or not. The rest of the mission field passed without incident between Pops and us. We spent good times with several of my siblings who were old enough to come on the trip, and we hoped that Pops would do what we'd asked and pray about starting to pay some of us other kids. Almost as soon as they left, the security situation in the area got worse. We heard rumors of increased gang violence, and we were warned that even walking for a minute or two on our own in the wrong street would put us at risk for kidnapping. We tried not to give too much oxygen to the fear, but we felt like we had a target on our backs, and it felt like our worries were further affirmed with the news that TLC had decided to take out ransom insurance on us. Oh, I did not know about that, which only made us feel even more vulnerable. No matter how much we wanted to blend in and be a part of the community, we knew we stood out. We were the only white people in the area. When we visited when I was a kid, it had never bothered me at all. But now, with the dangers increasing, and me as a mama and wife having so much more to lose, it felt different. People encouraged us to keep an unpredictable schedule as much as possible, but that was hard to do while being in a consistent ministry. In the end, it wasn't us they came for. Pretty much every male in the country was in a gang, even boys as young as 7 and 8. There were only 2 ways of getting out. You either died or you joined a church. For some reason, the gangs left Christians alone. That's weird. But only if the person was genuinely committed to their church. Even then, the gangs still forced those non-members to pay taxes for rent for their freedom. We had been attending and helping in various ministries at the local church affiliated with the ministry we were working with ever since we arrived, and we were starting to become good friends with the people there, especially with one family who lived 10 minutes from our house. One of their daughters, Fatima, had a boyfriend who had gotten out of a gang. Raul was 16 or 17, and we'd seen him at church from time to time. One day while Raul was out on the street, a car pulled up and took him. Nobody ever saw or heard from him again. Everybody assumed the same 2 things, that someone somewhere had noticed that he hadn't been regular at the church, and that Raul was now dead. Not long after, Fatima and her mother Rosa showed up in the church in tears. They told us that the gang had instructed them not to ask any questions or look for Raul or his body, and that if they did, they would be next. As the violence continued, we decided to get a permanent guard of our own, not just for when the missions teams were with us. It was yet another expense that we couldn't afford, but the risk of not having someone armed to protect us was too great. We didn't have a television in El Salvador, and even if we had, the show usually aired later internationally. So we weren't keeping up with the show, and for a while it felt like it was happening on a different planet. That didn't last long. As soon as season 1 of Jill and Just Accounting On aired just before Christmas, there was an increase in emails and phone calls as TLC made plans for season 2. We were given instructions to shoot a lot of our content ourselves. Home video of anything from us eating a meal to Israel starting to walk. And since the arrangement was more conducive to our schedule, it worked out okay. The request that Chad emailed to us after Christmas was a whole nother matter. TLC wanted to shoot some new promotional content for commercials, and they wanted all of us adult Duggar children involved in the show to fly to Houston for a few days in February. Even though the show was technically about us adult children and had been branded to look different from the old 19 Kids and Counting, everything behind the scenes was still the same. Scott was still the producer, Pops was still the only one being paid and the one in control of the contract, and Chad was still the one carrying out Pops and the network's bidding, making sure everyone stayed in line and behaved as they were supposed to in order to get this new series off the ground. Back in October, when we left Arkansas and returned to El Salvador, we'd told Chad and everybody else about the commitment we'd made to Mike to stay in the country until the end of July 2016. When Chad asked about us going to Houston for filming, we figured that maybe Chad had forgotten this, so we apologized that we couldn't make it and reminded him that we'd given our word that we would remain in El Salvador. He didn't reply, but in January, Chad did email us to say that since he was about to book tickets to Houston, we needed to tell him which flight we wanted. That's so funny, like he just ignored it. We wrote back telling Chad that we were not able to make it, reminding him again of our deal with Mike. Chad's email was polite but insistent. He explained that the shoots were vital for promotion and the network was planning for the show and that our presence was key. It is a big deal for them, he wrote. They've offered if you have a list of things you need from the States that you cannot get in Central America, they will do that shopping for you and pack those things up to go back with you. We got back to him quickly, repeating our commitment to Mike, but we did say that we would pray about it more and let him know that we would be talking with Pops and Mom later that evening. The next day, after talking with my parents and praying, we slept on it. Our parents had been supportive, though clear that they wanted us to figure something out with Chad, and even more clear that they thought the shoot was important. We went back to Chad the next day and told him we felt that our time in the field was important and that we needed to honor our commitment, so traveling back wasn't an option. We suggested that we could shoot some video and send it to them, or that we could have the crew fly down and meet us at a San Salvador airport hotel and do the shoot in front of a green screen in the afternoon. We hoped that somehow we could figure out a compromise. We couldn't. Eventually, after several emails, Derek picked up the phone and called Chad. "We don't have to come back," he said. "Jill isn't obligated to do anything. Jill and I have only ever been volunteers." Chad shot back, "Jill has a contractual obligation. She has to return." "Excuse me? Jill has never signed any contract." The call ended soon after and was followed by an email from Chad outlining what he alleged I was obligated to, a pasted list of various obligations towards the show, including that we would make ourselves available to all promotional activities as requested by the network. Chad's email referenced a contract that I had signed, and the contract was fixed for 5 years. I was confused. Derek was suspicious. "Do you remember ever being part of any contract deals with the network?" "No," I said. "Never. Pops always handled all communication with the network." I was upset, confused, and immensely disturbed by the idea of there being some sort of actual contract out there that might obligate me to things beyond my control, a contract of which I have zero recollection of ever signing. As the weeks passed, while I was stressing about this phantom contract, the attempts to get us to agree to Houston increased. The phone calls and pressure continued to build, but we heard less from Chad and more from my parents. Oh, they're putting the big guns on them. We asked Chad and Pops to send us a copy of whatever contract we were obligated to, but still, nobody would give us anything. They just kept pressuring us about the shoot, repeating that I was obligated to attend. The more they pressed, the more we pushed back. The only commitment I felt obligated to was the one we had made to Mike, to serve the mission fully. 3 days out from the shoot, the phone rang. It was early morning, and even before I looked at the screen, I knew who was calling. Pops had called me twice already that day. Saying no to the Houston trip felt like torture, but Derek and I have been doing it for weeks now, and we're committed to standing firm. After years and years of compromise and giving in to whatever demands the network made, finally we had found a hill to die on. This was our moment to take a stand. We were not doing it to make things difficult for the network or for Pops. We wanted to make everyone happy. We wanted to work things out, and we were still trying to be as accommodating as possible. However, we just felt like we had to make the right choice. Instead of feeling happy or empowered, I felt angry that things had come to this. Angry and terrified too. "Pops," I said, trying to get a word in as soon as he began. That's not what we're saying." The tension made my voice sound different, younger, like I was 12 instead of 25. Maybe that's what he wanted, to put the right kind of pressure on the right nerves. But I didn't want to cave and just give in. I wanted Pops to understand why we were taking a stand like this. I wanted him to know that we'd made a commitment to our ministry. I wanted him to be proud of us for that, but instead all I could hear in his voice was frustration. He really doesn't care about anybody else's goings-ons or anybody else's ministry. And honestly, you can tell in Jill's heart, she wants everyone to be happy. She wants to find a good compromise. She doesn't want her dad to be unhappy. So it's really sad that he probably knows that and can see that and is manipulating her in that way. It's so important that you're there for this. It's Jill and Jessica counting on, and they need you. Surely Mike can spare you for just one day. Derek came and stood by me, his arm around my shoulders. My heart was racing. I felt sick. I put Pops on speakerphone so we could both hear what he was saying, but his request hadn't changed in any of the calls he'd made over the previous day. He wanted us on a plane that weekend, arriving in Houston in time for the shoot. But while the request was the same, his tone was different. On all the other calls, he tried to persuade us. Now he was trying to guilt us. Is this you, or is this Derek who's being a problem here? Which is also crazy because you gave her away. You set her up with this man, then you gave her away to his authority in your world. So it's like, why are you asking, like, who's behind this? I never heard Pop say anything like that before, and it pierced like a dagger to hear him try to pit us against each other like that. I was speechless. That isn't like you, sweet Jilly Muffin. Is Derek behind this? Are you having problems financially? Are you depressed? I could feel Derek tensing beside me. I would come through that fucking phone, bro. That would piss me off so bad. Pops, he said, his voice calm and controlled. We really aren't trying to ruin anything. We wish we could help, but we've made a commitment here. There was a pause before Pop spoke. When he did, his voice had a new, harsher edge to it. If you don't come back for this filming thing, everything's going to be messed up. We just got the show back and going again, and we need to be real careful not to rock the boat with the network. They can't film the promotional material for Jill and Just Accounting On without you, Jill. Just think about it. If you don't come to shoot this and TLC cancel the show again, everyone is going to look at you and know that it's your fault and that you could have stopped it. Are you going to be okay carrying that burden? That almost reminds me when he asked the judge in Josh's pretrial hearing when he's like, are you going to allow this? Like, it's giving the same vibe. Hey, Derek said, stepping in to defend me. Let me talk to you for a minute, Derek, because you are causing your wife to go against her word. Is that something you're going to do? Make her break her word? If so, let me tell you, you are failing your family and leading them down a path of destruction. Are you prepared for that? Do you know what happens if you break a legally binding contract? It was the first time he mentioned the contract other than an email, though I still hadn't seen it. I could feel the blood rush to my face. I was so angry. There was a moment's silence. You know, said Pops, maybe you should flip a coin. Bro, he's back to that. Like, okay, so if you haven't seen the chapter 1 video on this, he said that he flipped a coin to decide if he was going to run for some sort of governmental office or not. And that's how he made all his big decisions, which is just so immature and weird. Derek said, excuse me? A coin. I did it when I was trying to decide whether to run for the U.S. Senate. I flipped it 3 times and it came up heads every time. That's how I knew I should run. Both of us sat in silence. That only seemed to make Pops more upset. I mean, what do you say to that even? Let me tell you something now. You're gonna get sued. You're gonna need whatever money you have because you're gonna get sued. Pops called back later that same day, and for the first time we didn't answer. We just let the phone ring. We did the same thing with the next call too, and the next. I felt a glimmer of relief, but it was more than overshadowed by the strong sense of guilt that was disrespecting him in this way. My head was spinning, my stomach clamped painfully tight. Even on silent, the sound of the phone buzzing into life felt like the gunshots that had sent us into hiding months earlier. I felt tense and anxious. There was no closet deep or dark enough for me to hide in this time. Finally, we turned off our phones. My anxiety only got worse. All afternoon, I was in agony, flipping between fear and guilt every few seconds. I felt like I was in labor, but not like it'd been with Israel. This was no new life that I was bringing into the world, and there was no sense that if we could get through this storm with Pops, then everything would be okay. On the contrary, I was terrified that things were about to get a whole lot worse. Later, when it was dark and all we could hear from outside were the sounds of cicadas, I finally began to cry. Derek was holding me close, trying to make me feel safe and protected, while all I could feel was fear and guilt. Guilt and fear. My own father didn't recognize me, didn't like me. Maybe he didn't even love me anymore. What had I done? What had I become? What if he's right, Derek? I sobbed into the darkness. What if we show up in America and we're taken to jail? Derek held me tighter, telling me everything was going to be okay. They're not going to sue the poor missionaries in Central America who have no contractual obligation and who haven't received so much as a cent in return for their work. But the fear I felt was so real. I was convinced that by disrespecting Pops like this, by stepping out from the umbrella of his protection, I was placing myself in great danger. If the courts didn't punish me, maybe God would. On the day of the shoot, when my adult siblings were in Houston, I woke up feeling differently. Not totally better, but not as bad as before. Some of the guilt had eased, and the fear wasn't quite so tight around my throat anymore. I felt like I could breathe again. We made it all the way to Sunday, and we hadn't given in. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing up for myself. Sundays were always busy in El Salvador, and this one was no different. We always worked in a local village that had a lot of gang activity, coordinating job skills training and teaching a Bible study. Besides that, Derek had a Sunday sermon to finish preparing for. It was good to feel like we were doing something, good to be distracted. I was just finishing feeding Israel when I heard a vehicle approach up front. Then the door slammed shut, and a voice I'd recognize anywhere called out, "Hey, Derek, Jill, are you there?" I opened the door and saw them, Mom and Pops, coming down the stairs. Her eyes were kind of teary. Pops was behind his phone, filming this family reunion. That is so unhinged. Oh my gosh, because like, if he's filming it, you can't be acting weird. You gotta act nice. But oh my god, that is genuinely unhinged. Also, how did they get there? That it's kind of quick, right? And it's dang, it's that important to you. The show is that important to you. You're gonna get on a red eye to freaking El Salvador, you freak. Well, I guess they are in Arkansas, so it would be a little bit of a shorter flight than from where I live. Now that I'm thinking about it, but it's still insane. I opened the door and saw them, Mom and Pops, coming down the stairs. I didn't know what to say. My sweet Jilly Muffin mask wasn't appearing on command. Derek was stunned too. I mean, that's shocking. "We wanted to come see you," said Pops after an awkward pause. "Didn't we, Michelle?" She nodded and Pops put the phone away. He looked right at me. I could feel the walls edge closer, and I braced for impact. "I realized I was a little harsh," he said. "I'm sorry for some of the things I said." He's always changing his approach. If one approach doesn't work with someone, he is gonna throw the next approach at the wall, I feel is what it really seems like. I reached for Derek's hand. If I ever needed to be reminded that my husband and I were united, it was then. So that's the end of the chapter. Also, what's crazy is they're already in a precarious situation with their safety, and Jim Bob is putting strain on their marriage, a very new marriage. They're 2 years in, and he's putting this terrible strain and pitting them against each other. So it's just it just goes against everything he believes in, really. It's just very odd. But the next chapter, which is called No Agreement, chapter 6, we are going to get into what happens when Jim Bob and Michelle visit them to try to pressure them to go to Houston. That is not going to be an episode you want to miss. So definitely subscribe, put your post noties on, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.
Just it's really fake and gay. And I am actually an expert on all matters that are fake and gay.